Tominey. He's the Tory MP for Shrewsbury and Atcham. Daniel, lovely to see you this morning. You ready for a May election?
Well, we will be ready for whenever the election is called.
I know, but what do you reckon? May rather than the autumn next year?
Well, whether it's May or October, it's a difference of a few months, isn't it?
I know, but when you've got a team ready to try and assemble an election campaign and you've got less time, you know, we'll come out of Christmas and the next thing we know, everyone's going to be leafleting. That puts pressure on MPs like you, doesn't it? Well,
we were out leafleting and canvassing in Shrewsbury yesterday. We knocked on nearly 300 doors in 2.5 hours. So we're already in election mode, and that will be the case for the next 12 months.
Are you worried about the Lib Dems in Shrewsbury? Because we've got Ed Davey today saying that he's intending on smashing through the blue wall. Your voters might not necessarily want to switch to Labour, but they might think that the Lib Dems are a bit of a halfway house?
Well, we never discount the threat from the Lib Dems in any constituency, but I think the Labour Party is the main challenge.
And what about this net zero climb down? Presumably you were in support of this in the week.
Very much so, and so are many Tory party activists.
So are you changing your mind about Rishi Sunak? Because I remember our last conversation, you were a bit ambivalent about him and his conservative credentials. You perhaps didn't think he was right-wing enough, and now we've just heard from David Maddox talking about him throwing red meat to Tories like you, so you must be delighted.
Well, I didn't vote for him originally, but what I have seen over the last 12 months is that he has brought back discipline into the Conservative Parliamentary Party, and now he is giving us the sort of policies that we can sell on the doorstep, particularly over the changes over net zero.
Yeah.
The United Kingdom produces less than 1% of global CO2 emissions, and we have reduced those at a faster rate than most of our G20 competitors. So he understands, unlike Sir Keir, that yes, we are committed to reducing CO2 emissions, but we can't move at a pace which puts our industry and households at a disadvantage to our European competitors. That's very, very important.
OK, so you might be able to sell that on the doorstep, although obviously some polling companies suggest that the public are behind the net zero ambition, if not having to pay for it through the nose to achieve it. How well does the idea of scrapping HS2 go down on the doorstep?
Well, one of the reasons I supported HS2 is the then...
I didn't know you supported... Are you regretting that support, Daniel?
I've got to be honest with you. I voted for it because we were told by Patrick McLaughlin, the then Secretary of State for Transport, that this was also an issue of capacity. We have been campaigning for a direct train service from London to Shrewsbury, and we weren't allowed to have it for a long time because they said that the network is at full capacity. We've secured a direct train service between London and Shrewsbury, but we were told that HS2, it's not just about you know, faster trains to Birmingham or Manchester. We were also told about capacity.
So do you feel you were lied to? Because it seems ridiculous to have been sold HS2 on the basis of more capacity from London to Birmingham, and now we seem to be talking about more capacity from Old Oak Common to Birmingham and no more capacity at all between Birmingham and Manchester.
Well, when you make these monumental changes, like the Victorians did, on building major infrastructure projects, which could potentially have major benefits, not just for yourselves, but for future generations, of course they're controversial. Of course they're costly. Of course there are people who think that we can't afford it. But
well, we can't really, can we? It's gone from 35 billion to 100 billion. Well, don't you regret the cost? Do you regret voting for it?
I do know that this is a highly polarised issue, and I know that there are many constituents who feel that we ought to scrap it.
Do you wish that you hadn't voted for it?
No, I'm not going to say that. I'm waiting to hear how the government will respond to these growing costs, but the issue of capacity is a genuine one. It wasn't raised in your previous interview with my friend David Maddox, but it is still an important issue to be debated.
But the demand on the railways has gone down because more people are working remotely since COVID.
And this is one of the things which I recognise, and I agree with David in the sense that, you know, next Saturday, yet another train strike, and I think the trade unions have played a big part in disincentivising people from using the train.
We can blame the unions for a lot. And, you know, I'm the first to call out strikes that affect all of our travel plans, not least when we're trying to commute into work and earn an honest day's crust. However, we can't blame the unions for a bill on HS2 skyrocketing from 35 billion to over 100 billion, and lunatic decision-making, like, for instance, axing the leg from Old Oak Common to London, and now not investing in the north. I mean, you're in a more northern constituency than a lot of people who might be making this decision-making down in London. The north feels left behind from a rail perspective. You've got to sympathise with that. I get that you've got your rail link, but we've still not got a clear link from Manchester to Leeds in 2023.
Oh, absolutely, and you are highlighting the alternative perspectives and debates and arguments of this highly polarising issue. And I understand the frustration that the residents, voters have over the spiralling costs of this project. It's something that the government will have to address over the coming weeks and months to explain what their strategy is. But I don't apologise for voting for it, because I do know that the capacity issue for us was essential in getting a direct link for us from Shrewsbury to London.
Let's just drill into your experience on Polish matters. The collapse of this grain deal between Poland and Ukraine, and now Poland had been a key ally of President Zelensky's, now sort of talking about withdrawing weaponry. What's your analysis of that, Daniel?
Well, no two European countries have done more for Ukraine than Britain and Poland. And these two critical NATO partners have joined forces to help Kiev at a time of extraordinary manipulation and aggression from Moscow. What I really regret is that obviously the Ukrainians can't export their grain through the Black Sea because the Russians are preventing that from happening. There was an agreement with the European Union that Ukraine could transit through European Union countries to export their grain to third parties. That agreement came to an end on September the 15th, and the European Union has not extended it. And so now Ukraine is dumping its grain.
I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to leave it there because unfortunately we're running out of time.
All right.
But you support Poland's decision-making in this?
Well, I think Poland is a very strong supporter of Ukraine, yes.
All right. We've got weather coming next, and I'll be back very soon. Don't go anywhere.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the week ahead, it is certainly going to remain unsettled, especially middle of the week, potentially turn very windy for some of us. Back to the here and now, and we have got low pressure generally dominating the Atlantic. That's going to bring in bands of rain as we go through the next 24 hours, and note that the tightly packed isobars indicating it's going to be very windy. So here's the situation as we end Sunday. Got a band of rain spreading its way across the country, some heavy pulses on it, and it's going to be a fairly windy night, especially across the northern half of the country, turning a little bit drier and clearer across the south as we end the night. And for all of us, it's going to be a fairly mild one, temperatures staying in double figures. So we start Monday off on a fairly sunny note across many parts of England and Wales. Still maybe some overnight rain to contend with across the very far southeast. And really the day is going to be a mixture of sunshine and scattered showers. The showers mainly focus across more northern parts of the country. Could see some heavy showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland too. And quite a breezy day, especially again in the north. That may temper the temperatures somewhat up here, but down towards the southeast, feeling quite warm, highs of 23 degrees. Tuesday, another day of sunny spells and scattered showers. Could see some heavy showers initially across the east, and then later on this more organised band of rain spreading in from the west as we go through the course of the day. And that sets us up for a very windy middle part of the week. Watch out for Wednesday. Warnings are in force for the north and west.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We're going to be speaking about that subject now to Luciana Burgess, who's the former Labour and Liberal Democrat MP for Liverpool Wavertree. Lovely to see you, Luciana. Thanks for coming into the studio. Let's ask you about the net zero climb down, because you were Shadow Energy and Climate Change Minister for 3 years in the previous administration, let's put it that way. What do you think? Because I'm a bit confused by where Starmer stands on this issue. We haven't really heard much pushback from him on some of the climate announcements that have been made by Rishi Sunak in the week. We've got a briefing into the Sunday papers today that says that your former colleague Ed Miliband, who I know you work really close with on some of his own measures, is a liability for the Labour Party, and that people are getting annoyed with him because he might be costing the Labour Party votes because of his quite hawkish stance on the climate. What do you think?
Well, I think Keir Starmer's been pretty busy this week, holding the government to account. You know, we are, I wouldn't say celebrating, we're acknowledging, the year anniversary this weekend of what was a shocking period under the leadership of Liz Truss as Prime Minister, and that disastrous budget, which has resulted in impacting on so many people across the country, whether that's the cost that they're incurring with increased mortgages, etc. You know, it's some very, very tricky times. So rightly so, as I think the leader of the Labour Party, we've seen him this week deal and contend with that issue being in the city. We've also
been in France and Montreal.
And I was also say also, he's on the international stage, and he's, we can't solve the world's problems as a country by ourselves. And I think it's absolutely right that he's been spending time meeting with leaders, both in Montreal. He was with Macron earlier this week. So I think he's been pretty busy.
I know, but at the same time, do we think that he's perhaps not setting out his strong and staunch opposition to what Rishi Sunak is saying, precisely for the point you've just mentioned, that people are facing really tough times economically. You know, the cost of living crisis is still a thing for people. Energy bills have come down, but we're now into the winter season, and if you're anything like me, you've put your thermostat back up because it's been cold. And therefore, he can't position himself against this because he knows it's saving people money.
Well, first of all, I don't agree with that. I think that, well, first of all, I think we have heard some very robust proposals from the Labour Party, which are very practical and actually showing what a government can and should be doing to support people with their energy bills. So whether it's the Labour proposal to create GB Energy, that we should be creating energy in this country, we should also be harnessing the natural resources that we have. We're an island, we have wind that blows, we've got tidal power that we should be accessing. We've seen that stall even just in the past year. We've seen terrible examples of where we haven't seen any sort of offshore energy projects going ahead. So absolutely, we shouldn't be relying on dictators like Putin to determine what we're paying with our energy bills. I welcome the fact that Labour has set out its plan to have a GB Energy, and they've also set out the Warm Homes plan, which would help millions of households.
Although Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, had to say that their Green Prosperity Plan, which is $28 billion a year on green measures, would have to be delayed because there wasn't enough money. And then people said, well, have you really costed any of this? I mean, there's a suggestion that the Climate Change Act that was introduced by Ed Miliband has cost, at a Conservative estimate, about £500 million.
So let's break down all those different elements. I think it's absolutely right that a Shadow Chancellor is being prudent with the economy's finances in the way that we haven't seen from this government, and we are all suffering. I mean, people are now paying on average £220 a year more this year compared to last year on their mortgage costs alone if they're a homeowner. And actually, we have to look at the nation's finances, and Labour doesn't know exactly what it might inherit if they're successful at the general election, but certainly it's right for them to say, our nation's finances are in such dire straits that we need to be responsible. And I think anyone would welcome that, because we haven't seen that fiscal and economic responsibility from this government. And certainly, people are really suffering as a result of that. But what Labour has is that it acknowledges and it rightly recognises the opportunities that it would bring. We need to look at what the jobs are for the future in this country, and whether that's investing in our energy infrastructure or ensuring that we have homes that aren't spending... there are millions of households in this country that are spending money on their energy bills, on electricity and gas, because we have such leaky properties. We have some of the most energy inefficient homes in this country. So for the Prime Minister to say that he's going to delay the energy efficiency targets, what does that mean for the majority of people renting in this country?
But equally, what does it mean for responsible landlords who are saddled with £10,000 to £15,000 bills, which presumably they can only then transfer onto their tenants with higher rents? I mean, has all of this stuff just been rushed too much because figures like Ed Miliband have actually become zealots over the climate? They've sort of inherited this kind of Greta Thunberg catastrophe approaching narrative, which is actually not really in sync with the electorate, who is saying we care about the planet, but we don't want to have to pay through the nose to do it. Not least, as David Maddock pointed out, that we only account for 1% of global CO2 emissions.
But people are paying for it. People are paying for it at this moment. They've seen it acutely in the past year, where they've had to pay, upwards of £3,000 for some households on energy bills because their homes are so energy inefficient. And our homes are much less energy efficient compared to many other properties, be that residential homes or commercial properties across Europe. And this is something that the government could have contended with. You rightly point out that I was Shadow Minister for Energy and Climate Change back in 2010. I did that role for 3 years. I stood opposite the government that said they were going to do all these things to support homeowners to invest, or landlords. None of that came forward. I wrote countless articles, they're still online. I would welcome anyone to go and read them. It's all come true, where we've now 13 years down the line, we're not in any better position to help households to be able to insulate their properties, and whether that's homeowners themselves, whether that's people living in rented accommodation or social housing, we've got a massive issue. We have 19 million homes at a starting point that could, that desperately need to be better insulated, and we haven't seen any of that happen. So people are paying today, and they're also paying the higher energy bills because we haven't seen a government invest in our energy security and our energy infrastructure. So we now have to rely on foreign gas imports. We've got loads of issues which many people, including myself, pointed out 13 years ago, and we are no further down the line.
You're now on here banging the drum for Labour and Labour policies, which is great. Obviously, you've had quite a political journey. You were driven out of the party under Jeremy Corbyn by anti-Semitism. At one point, you had to have a bodyguard. You were receiving appalling anti-Semitic abuse on social media and in other avenues. Keir Starmer's now come in. We had a segue where you went to the Liberal Democrats during the whole Brexit Remain divide. I know you had a child in that time. The independent group that you joined from Labour then ended up being Change UK. You stood as a Lib Dem in 2019, and now you're back as a Labour Party member. Presumably, then you have confidence that Starmer has cleaned up Labour's act on this, even though we've got inappropriate language used by Diane Abbott when it comes to writing letters to The Guardian. We've also got Jeremy Corbyn and the spectre of him potentially running for Mayor of London. What's your reaction to that?
Well, firstly, on Jeremy Corbyn, I've listened very closely to what Sir Keir Starmer has said and the leadership of the Labour Party, and he has made it very clear there is no future, zero future for Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party, and he will not be running as a Labour candidate.
Should there be a political future for Jeremy Corbyn at all when you consider the sharing of the anti-Semitic mural and he denies it, but his tendency towards anti-Semitic tropes, but also supporters who have definitely harboured anti-Semitic views.
Oh, I mean, I'm on record on countless occasions being very clear about my position on Jeremy Corbyn. And I think for me what was most acute was when an independent body in this country, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, carried out an investigation into what happened under his leadership in the Labour Party and found the party to be guilty of breaching the Equality Act, of being perpetrated harassment and intimidation of its Jewish members, and also the fact that under his leadership there was direct political interference in what was going on.
So he shouldn't run for Mayor of London.
Well, let's be very clear, he's not going to be running as a Labour candidate.
No, but should he run at all?
Well,
after these findings?
Well, I mean, there's nothing to stop anyone from running as candidates unless they
but morally,
of course he should
consider his position. There's loads of Jewish people living in London.
Of course he should, but let's be very clear, he's not going to be running on the Labour ticket.
No,
if he runs as a candidate, he will be as an independent candidate. He'll be running against the Labour Party, and it's been made very clear that he will not be allowed to run as a Labour candidate, a parliamentary candidate, or any other type of Labour candidate at the next general election or any future council election. So I can't control what anyone seeks to do as an independent.
I know, but you wouldn't.
I'd be very
happen.
Absolutely not. And I'd be very outspoken, if that does go ahead. I mean, it remains to be seen.
You don't think he should run, is what I'm trying to get.
Of course not. Of course not. I mean, he hasn't either denied or confirmed that he will be running.
I mean, should he have just stepped down from politics altogether with the findings of that report?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very much very clearly on record as saying how disgraceful it was that in the wake of an extensive inquiry, which we didn't even look, it looked at a certain number of cases. It didn't look at everything because it wasn't possible to look at everything. But, they took, I think it was, around 100 cases and looked at, what happened under his reign. And, the shame of what happened under his watch, under his leadership, which he then, sought to denigrate even further by not accepting the findings of the report, was an absolute disgrace.
Wendy Chamberlain, the Lib Dem MP for North East Fife and the Liberal Democrat Chief Whip, joins me now from their party conference in Bournemouth. Wendy, thank you for your time, because I know you're busy at conference. I know what it's like. You're here, there and everywhere. Now, we've seen from Ed Davey this morning, he's given an interview to The Observer where he says he's going to smash through the blue wall. So tell me, how many seats are you hoping to win at the next general election, Wendy?
Well, obviously, Ed was pointing to our 4 by-election victories that we've had since 2019. And you may remember Chesham and Amersham, that was the first of our stunts with that blue wall. But I think it's quickly developed as a narrative because it's quite clear that we have the opportunity. There were 80 seats that we were seconds to the Conservatives in 2019. But there's a number of seats now where we believe that we can beat the Conservatives. So, Camilla, I'm not going to put a number on it, but what I would say is we're working really hard. We're realistic about the targets that we're working for. And I think we've got a really credible set of parliamentary candidates who I've been meeting with already this weekend.
Do you think the public are sure of your policies, though, Wendy? It's interesting you mentioned Amersham and Chesham. That's very near my neck of the woods. I live very nearby. And I was a bit confused by the Liberal Democrat campaign, because in the manifesto, you speak about your continued commitment to HS2, and then, lo and behold, when you campaigned in Chesham and Amersham, you were anti-HS2 in your leaflets. So which is it? Are you pro the rail project or anti?
Well, Camilla, you'll maybe remember, given it's so close to you, that Cheryl Gillan, who was the Conservative MP in Chesham Amersham before Sarah Green, despite the fact that the Conservative position then was to support HS2, was opposed to it, and she was opposed to it on the basis of her constituent. And Sarah Green, now the MP in Chesham Amersham, representing our constituents in that way. But in relation to HS2, I think for me, as a Scottish politician, where we need to look at UK-wide infrastructure and improve that, and improve services in the north, which have long been neglected, I think there is still a case for HS2, and I think it's short-sighted of the government to be moving back from those commitments. I think for those in the north, it's a betrayal.
If the Liberal Democrats are in a stronger position come the next general election, be that in the spring or indeed autumn next year, say if you were in some kind of confidence and supply situation with Labour, would you insist that the HS2 project continues?
Look, I'm not going to talk about what comes after the election or confidence supply. In fact, I think Ed Davey's been really clear that there are no facts and deals, and I think you only have to look at in campaign mid-Bedfordshire to understand that. But, as a policy position, we're committed to HS2 because we believe that what has long been neglected is the infrastructure to deliver the productivity and economic benefits that the UK desperately needs. The government has stepped away from levelling up. It's meaningless.
OK, another issue of confusion for me because of what your colleague Layla Moran, who's the Foreign Affairs spokeswoman, said yesterday. We want to rejoin the EU, she told a fringe meeting at conference. Yet at the same time, Ed Davey says you don't. Who's right, Layla Moran or Ed Davey?
So, Camilla, we, as you know, the Liberal Democrats are very interested in policy, and that's what we're debating in the coming days. And we have a four-point plan in relation to how we rebuild our relationship with Europe. And I think that's the thing that's really key. We didn't vote for Boris Johnson's oven-ready deal. Everybody believes that Brexit is not working, regardless of what your position was before the referendum. So what the Liberal Democrats are focused on is rebuilding that relationship with Europe so that we can then look at other things in the future. But we have to be focused on that in the first instance.
But Wendy, to what extent? I think the quote, "we want to rejoin," is unequivocal from Layla Moran, isn't it?
Well, what I would say is, go back to our four-point plan. We need to rebuild that relationship. This is not, it's easy to use words like rejoin or single market. This is really complicated. Not only have we, and that's what the Conservatives completely failed to appreciate, particularly under Boris Johnson, hence the oven-ready deal. But we're in a position now where not only is our economy suffering as a result of Brexit, but the trust and relationships that we had with our European neighbours have been damaged as well. This is a long-term project.
OK. I also noted that yesterday the Liberal Democrat conference passed a motion insisting that menstruation affects non-binary and trans people. Therefore, the language around women menstruating should be changed to people who menstruate. Are the Lib Dems trying to erase women?
Camilla, that's not quite right. The policy was particularly in relation to period poverty, and I'm sure both you and I will be completely aligned on the need to address that. We know that 1 in 5 women has issues in relation to period poverty, where they can't afford period products, they can't gain access to them, and that's what our policy motion was focused on yesterday.
But what's this phrase, people who menstruate? Isn't that also known as women?
Women and people who are trans. It's a very small proportion of the population. But what I'm saying to you is that policy was about period poverty, and I'm pretty sure you and I can both agree about the need to address that.
I know, but have you removed woman and changed it to people who menstruate? Because why not say women and...
We haven't removed women at all. I mean, I know women and girls struggle with this issue, but I think we also have to make sure that we are inclusive and we make sure that we're considering everybody in our policy making.
Do you know many men who menstruate, though?
Camilla, we're talking about period poverty. I think it was a really strong, powerful, and I really wish you had been there. You should look it back on YouTube to hear the debate, because we were very focused on that challenge.
OK, quick yes-no answer, if you don't mind, to finish, Wendy. Are you going to be advocating votes for 16 and 17-year-olds like Labour?
I'm the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group for votes at 16, alongside the father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley. So that's
a yes. All right, lovely to have an unequivocal answer at the end, Wendy. Enjoy the rest of conference. Lovely to see you this morning.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan Tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Now, somebody who's also been robust in his questioning in the past is Sir Richard Dearlove, former head of MI6, who joins me now. Sir Richard, lovely to speak to you this Sunday morning. Thanks very much for your time. I mean, this is the week that we've seen 5 Bulgarians arrested for suspected spying on behalf of Russia. We've obviously had the Chinese spying scandal in Parliament. So, Richard, what's your view? Have we got a problem with espionage that might have escalated in recent years?
Well, it may have escalated on the Chinese side, and I think the Chinese probably have become more active over the last decade. On the Russian side, it's a problem that's been there since the end of the Cold War. There hasn't been a break in Russian espionage activity. It's just continued at much the same level. But every now and again, you see a bit more of the iceberg above the water.
Chinese spying story involving a researcher who had been able to get a pass into Parliament. Does that worry you? Does it surprise you? Or has this stuff always happened and perhaps been thwarted by MI6 and others before the public's even got to know about it?
Well, I think there's a lot that you don't learn, and that's not surprising because it's kept secret. It doesn't appear in the public domain. I think the case in Parliament indicates that foreign governments that are hostile to us always take an interest in political activity and try and exercise influence in any way that they can. Not sure exactly the character of this case in Parliament. It is, it's unusual. We haven't had a case quite like that. Bear in mind, you had this lady, Lee, this solicitor in London quite recently, who, when she was identified, saw his influence, did a runner and disappeared overseas. I think we have a similar case probably with this young man.
I thought it was interesting as well when you said about the Cold War, the repositioning of our relationship with China. There's been quite a lot of political debate about this. Have we been too close to the Chinese under Cameron and Osborne? Should we now put some distance between us, as was advocated by Liz Truss? How should we be managing our relationship with China?
With great care is my answer. And I think if you go back, yes, we were rather naive. I mean, I've said this publicly before. I've criticised David Cameron and George Osborne for being far too enthusiastic to get close to China. Now, we have a close relationship, a close economic relationship, but that relationship needs to be conducted with our eyes wide open, realising the downside, the dangers, the difficulties of dealing with China, when, you know, their attitude towards us is not entirely one of cooperation and friendliness. They don't believe in win-win. They believe in we win, you lose.
I was speaking to a defence and security expert in Parliament last week who was talking about the fear of the threat to our cyber and other infrastructure. There's been talk in the past about the vulnerability perhaps of some of the undersea cables which connect us to the rest of the world and are responsible for a lot of our internet and other infrastructure. Is that a key concern, Sir Richard, that I would understand has escalated in recent times because of the technological advances we've all made? It might actually make us more vulnerable.
Well, I think the Russians specifically did develop and have sophisticated means for attacking undersea cables. I think that we've probably had some incidents which aren't necessarily proven. For example, the cable to the Shetland Islands was cut earlier, I think last year. Yeah, it's a problem, it's a vulnerability, and I think it's one that the UK, being an island, is very, very conscious of. And there are measures, I'm sure, being taken to, defend that part of our infrastructure, which is so critical.
What's your analysis of Putin at the moment? I know you've raised concerns in the past about his health. He appeared with Kim Jong-un quite recently. His legs seem to be tapping a lot. What's your assessment of his current state, Sir Richard?
Well, I'm not a clinician. And, anything that we say about that is likely guesswork. But I mean, I do have quite a few medical friends who watch him carefully, and the consensus seems to be that he might have Parkinson's. But I gather that Parkinson's comes in different forms, and it isn't necessarily it's an illness that can be controlled, or it's an illness that can be much, much more serious. I'm not going to, as it were, claim medical knowledge, but I think that there's a fair amount of evidence to indicate there's something wrong with him.
What's your prediction on how his reign at the Kremlin might come to an end? Unseated by somebody on the inside?
Well, I think there are two possibilities. You could have someone within his group sort of depose him, or so that the same people remain. And I think the lead candidate for that would be someone like Nikolai Patrushev, who's head of his Security Council, former head of the internal KGB, known now as the FSB. So that's one possibility. I mean, the other possibility is something much more serious, and as it were, a change of regime. I think a lot really depends now on what happens in Ukraine. I mean, if Ukraine does regain all of its territory so that you have, let's say, a defeat of Russia, I think the implications then are much, much more serious. Maybe the war going badly, but hanging on to some of the territory is a different scenario. I mean, the problem that we have...
I say, what's your prediction for that? Because obviously we've seen the Ukrainians make some gains this weekend in Crimea. They've obviously knocked out a key strategic Russian target. When it comes to reclaiming the territory that they've lost, what likelihood is there of that, do you think, Sir Richard?
I don't think we can yet predict that. The military initiative is definitely with the Ukrainians at the moment. The offensive is going slowly. But when I was in Ukraine earlier this year, they were quite clear that there wouldn't be a magical counter-offensive. There would be a series of punches, a series of initiatives. And I think, their progress on the battlefield now, I think, depends on our determination to support and to continue to arm them. And I mean, for example, the American supply of ATACMS, these longer-range missiles, things like that can really tip the balance in their favour. But clearly they're making progress in the south, and they've made some quite optimistic statements recently, and their attack on Sevastopol clearly was strategically significant and an important sort of morale booster. So we have to wait and see what happens over the next few months, and then of course there'll be probably another offensive next spring after a reduction of fighting in the winter.
I was wondering whether there's a fear perhaps that the West is growing a little weary. I note what you're saying about the long-range missiles from the US. We had Boris Johnson writing in The Spectator an edition ago saying we really need to step up our support. And actually there has been this, well, ongoing weariness from the likes of Germany and other European countries. And then Poland and this grain deal, perhaps jeopardising their support for the Ukraine.
Yeah, there are problems. There's a problem with Poland, but I think this is largely related to the forthcoming Polish election, and the rural vote for the current government and winning that election. So it's a spat. I don't think it's going to, as it were, undermine ultimately the strategic relationship between Poland and the Ukraine. No. War weariness, yes. I mean, there are problems in Germany. If you look at the sort of polling in relation to Ukraine, there are problems in France, Slovakia. And then, of course, one has the concern of Trump and the possible Trump presidential candidature. These are problems, but...
on that subject, Sir Richard...
I'm not going to predict how it's going to turn out, but so far, so good. We're sustaining our support for the Ukrainians, and that's important.
Quick answer to this one, Sir Richard, if you don't mind. On that subject, who's a bigger threat to Western democracy, Donald Trump or an increasingly bewildered Joe Biden?
I think Trump is probably the worst outcome of the two.
It's a bit of a Hobson's choice, though, isn't it, Sir Richard?
It is indeed, and maybe neither will be presidential candidates.
Thank you very, very much indeed for your time this morning, Sir Richard Dearlove.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
all sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. As promised, I'm joined by Craig McKinlay in the studio. He's the Tory MP for South Thanet and chair of the Net Zero Scrutiny Committee. You've scrutinised the government's plans. What do you reckon? Has he climbed down on the climate stuff enough, or does he need to be more?
What I'm very pleased about is I think we've opened the door to a discussion, because we haven't been having a discussion before. A word we've heard a lot of this week is pragmatism.
Yes.
And I think this is a pragmatic approach. And do you know what is really underlying all this? Is that we do not have enough electricity generation.
I thought you were going to say votes.
Well, some of those would be nice as well.
It's politically more expedient for him to abandon some of these pledges, or at least delay them, because you know it's going to win you votes.
Well, at the end of the day, we're here to get elected. We're here to serve the public.
You might also be serving the public better if you try and save the planet.
Well, I don't think that's stopped at all. We've still got the 2050 in place, for good or ill.
Yeah.
But
do you not agree with that, then?
I'm a bit... Why 2050? Why not 2045? Why not 2055? Yeah. But what I'm concerned about is the rest of the world are really saying yaboo to all this.
Yeah.
And we seem to be embarking on a potentially £3 trillion enterprise. 3 trillion.
How have you got that calculation?
That's from National Grid. That is the potential up cost of decarbonising the UK.
Yeah.
We need to have that debate. And I need to be absolutely sure that these forecasts and everything else, just think about the OBR. They couldn't even get a forecast right 5 months ahead.
Yeah.
They were 14% wrong. But suddenly the climate change forecasters have got it absolutely right to 2100. I hope they have. I really hope they have. Because a £3 trillion enterprise has got to be founded on
absolutism. And I suppose the argument for that will be 3 trillion up until 2050.
It is. It is. But I mean, let me just explain the energy supply. Only
Yes.
20% of the energy we use is electricity.
Yeah.
The other 80% is petrol, diesel in your tank and gas and oil in your home. We haven't even got to the renewable sources to get to the 20% of electricity we use.
Yeah.
We're actually talking about replacing that 80% with renewable sources or nuclear, I hope. I'm very much in favour of nuclear. And then you've got to have a fair bit in reserve to charge whatever you're going to charge to be the storage mechanism for when the wind doesn't blow.
Yes.
Because typically, a couple of years ago in Germany, they had a wonderful word. Dunkelflaute is when you have an anti-cyclone sitting above Europe.
Yeah.
And the wind hasn't blown in the coldest bit of the winter.
I mean, because we had Luciana Berger on earlier talking about wind power and tidal and...
Yeah, it's all lovely, but where are you going to store it? This is the truth that nobody is talking about. You've got a choice of batteries, and I've got real grave concerns about batteries. Do we really want to be entering a Chinese supply chain? So, you know, we're jumping out of Putin's frying pan into President Xi's fire is one. You could do some pumping uphill, so you can use hydropower. But nobody's really talking about what the solution is. I'm worried that we are nudging the population into technologies that are very raw, not really tried. Are batteries in cars the best we can do? If we have that pause, perhaps hydrogen might show itself again, need loads and loads of electric power to make the stuff, or it might be a synthetic fuel.
But even if we're looking at hydrogen and other options, you're going to have to put a shed load of investment into some of those industries, and therefore it's going to cost the taxpayer in the long run, whatever happens. If we're going to be switching ever more greener, which I think we can both agree we should do, don't want to be Luddite about it and go back to the days of the Industrial Revolution, like pollution filling our cities and all the rest of it. What I found interesting about what you wrote for the Mail on Sunday this morning is you're talking about the counterintuitive nature of the drive towards electric cars. You're basically saying, in the headline, they'll need to excavate the streets using diesel diggers. Good point. And then you talk about the electrification plans for lamppost bins and benches as pie in the sky. Why do you say that?
You've got to connect or find an electricity supply to a lamppost, say. A lamppost only uses about 1 kilowatt. It's only got to do a bit of lighting. To actually have a fast charger uses 100 kilowatts. So to get that power to it, you're going to have some substantial cabling, some substantial new substation, and some electricity supply, please.
Yes, where's the electricity coming from?
That is the problem. I mean, my energy plan is that we go for a decade of gas, domestic preferably.
Yeah.
So we're not importing LNG from as far away as Australia, which on any CO2 terms is mad.
Yeah.
As we finally get back on track for a nuclear future,
Is the Prime
which was
Minister
abandoned in
listening to your
1997 by Tony Blair.
Yeah.
And we've only just about talking about
Does
it.
the Prime Minister listen to you, Craig? Do you go into Downing Street and have these chats?
I've had discussions with many of the senior ministers. Yeah, I haven't had a one-to-one with the Prime Minister about this, but energy ministers most certainly have. And I think my views on the energy policy were made very clear with the passage of the
But you
energy
must
bill.
be pleased because David Maddox was on the paper review earlier saying that he's handing Tories like you some red meat. Are you gobbling it up with glee?
I am. What I'm most pleased about is we're having the debate. For too long, we've not been having this debate about net zero. I mean, it wasn't long ago we were going to ban new cars and internal combustion engine cars at 2040. That was deemed to be the date. Then it shifted back down to 2035.
Yeah.
No great reason, I could see. And then Boris Boosterism, we loved him dearly,
Yes.
it went to 2030.
Well, talking of Boris, I mean, a lot of these ideas were his ideas and you
They were.
backed him.
I did. I didn't back him on the energy stuff. Not at
Yeah.
all. Not at all. And he knew I was not on that page with him.
OK.
I mean, the worst thing I think we ever had was having the saddle of COP26, because whoever's in the saddle tends to have to, over-egg it.
Produce ever more
Yeah.
great announcements to keep the likes of Greta
But what we
Thunberg
can
and
talk,
others
we're now on a reality check, I think,
Yes.
and that's important.
All right, let's have a reality check on a couple more domestic issues, if you don't mind. Let's whiz through some of these. May election or autumn election? What's your prediction?
I'm still on autumn.
Are you?
Yeah, I am still on autumn.
You're happy about
But it might be May. No, I don't.
Can you keep your seat, Craig?
Yeah, I can. Oh, yes, I can keep my seat.
Yeah?
Yes. It's going to be tough.
People
It's going to be
staying on
tough.
the doorstep. I mean, they're disaffected with the Tories. To say.
They are.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to the week ahead, it is certainly going to remain unsettled, especially middle of the week, could potentially turn very windy for some of us. Back to the here and now, and we have got low pressure generally dominating the Atlantic. That's going to bring in bands of rain as we go through the next 24 hours, and note that the tightly packed isobars indicating it's going to be very windy. So here's the situation as we end Sunday. Got a band of rain spreading its way across the country, some heavy pulses on it, and it's going to be a fairly windy night, especially across the northern half of the country, turning a little bit drier and clearer across the south as we end the night. And for all of us, it's going to be a fairly mild one, temperatures staying in double figures. So we start Monday off on a fairly sunny note across many parts of England and Wales. Still maybe some overnight rain to contend with across the very far southeast. And really the day is going to be a mixture of sunshine and scattered showers. The showers mainly focus across more northern parts of the country. Could see some heavy showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland too. And quite a breezy day, especially again in the north. That may temper the temperatures somewhat up here, but down towards the southeast, feeling quite warm, highs of 23 degrees. Tuesday, another day of sunny spells and scattered showers. Could see some heavy showers initially across the east, and then later on this more organised band of rain spreading in from the west as we go through the course of the day. And that sets us up for a very windy middle part of the week. Watch out for Wednesday. Warnings are in force for the north and west.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you